Over the course of his 4-decade career, Johnny Carson became one of the most renowned presenters and performers, most notably as the reigning monarch of late-night television from the 1960s into the early 1990s. Despite his extensive interview and conversational history with numerous prominent figures, the renowned talk show host is notoriously unpopular with one icon in particular. The guests who Johnny Carson couldn't tolerate, along with his purported favorites, will be discussed in today's film. Do not let this opportunity pass you by, so continue watching. We should discuss Johnny Carson's identity before moving on to the million-dollar question. Originally from Corning, Iowa, John William Carson came into this world on October 23, 1925. He was born to Ruth Elizabeth and Homer Lloyd Kit Carson in the middle of their family. At the age of 8, his family moved to Norfolk, Nebraska, where he spent his childhood. Carson has nurtured an interest in and skill for the performing arts since he was a little boy. And doing magic is the perfect pastime for children, isn't it? That's just what 12-year-old Carson did when he came across a magic book. A magician's kit was his next purchase, and he wasted no time putting it through its paces in front of his loved ones. Beginning with a game of chance. He had the unwavering support of his parents, particularly his mom, who even sewed him a cape to wear to his performances at the neighborhood Kiwanis Club. He had his first performance when he was 14 years old, charging $3. After that, he quickly had many more shows. Because young Carson was already making it big in Hollywood, it seemed like fate had already decided for him. He was fined $1.50 for attempting to hitchhike while pretending to be a midshipman. On June 8, 1943, Carson joined the United States Navy and was sent to the Pacific with the USS Pennsylvania, which put an end to his rise to fame. In addition to his role as a communications officer responsible for deciphering encrypted messages during the war, he had a remarkable amateur boxing record of 1501. He may be serving someone. However, Carson persisted in providing entertainment and even went so far as to say that performing a magic performance for U.S. Secretary of the Navy James V. Forrestal was the pinnacle of his career. The realization that even he could make the grumpy and charming Forrestal laugh made an impression on the future talk show host. After the war ended, Carson decided to attend NALL and become a member of the Phi Gamma Delta fraternity, where he also performed magic. He subsequently earned $1.25 for each appearance. He changed his major from journalism to speech and drama a few months in because he wanted to be a radio performer. In 1950, once Carson earned his degree, he began his broadcasting career at WOW Radio. Shortly after, he hosted a morning TV show called The Squirrel's Nest. It was clear that Carson had potential, despite his inexperience on the field. As a result, his career took off quickly. He then hosted the popular but low-budget Carson seller Johnny Carson's show, And Who Do You Trust? Following his triumph on Who Do You Trust, NBC extended an invitation for him to temporarily host The Tonight Show until Jack Parr's departure. Carson, like many others, turned down the opportunity due to the overwhelming pressure to conduct 105-minute interviews. In the end, NBC was successful in signing him in February 1962. And what followed was an account of events. Up until May of 1992, Johnny Carson was the host of the show that had been titled The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson. Jim Carrey, Ellen DeGeneres, Eddie Murphy, and Andy Kaufman are just a few of the current stars whose careers Carson helped start during his time on the show. As host of the late-night program, Carson has interviewed numerous famous people. Nonetheless, there was always one person the host despised: comic Bob Hope, who was born in the United Kingdom. A centenarian with a career spanning nearly 8 decades, Bob Hope is a multi-talented performer known for his comedic talents, acting chops, and producing prowess. Were you aware? Hope was the host of the Academy Awards 19 times during his life, more than any other actor. This American entertainer with British ancestry accomplished it all and lived to be 100 years old. Though he was born Leslie Towns Hope, he was just as famous as everyone recalled. Bob Hope was born into modest circumstances on May 29, 1903. He began performing stand-up comedy, singing and dancing on the streets to make ends meet. He was the sixth of 7 children. He was quite versatile and, like Carson, even dabbled in boxing under the pseudonym Packy East for a while. Hope had to have reconstructive surgery after a tree crushed his face in 1921 when he was working as a lineman. This gave him his distinctive look later in life. Before transitioning to radio appearances, mostly with NBC in 1934, he had a prolific early career appearing on vaudeville shows and Broadway productions. While he was in the movies from 1934 to 1972, his career really took off in the 1950s when he began hosting regular TV programs. Critics, audiences, and fans alike lauded his one-liners and comic timing, and he was hailed as a trailblazer in American stand-up comedy. The self-deprecating quips that Hope was known for, in which he would typically begin by praising himself before eventually bringing himself down, will also live on in memory. Carson never warmed up to him, especially in his latter years. Despite everything that he has done and accomplished, he is a hilarious guy at heart. Johnny Carson never came out and stated he disliked Bob Hope. But there's plenty of proof that the well-known talk show presenter disliked the second option. The elephant in the room wasn't confirmed until a certain book was published. The biography of Bob Hope, Hope Entertainer of the Century, is penned by Richard Zoglin and published by Simon Schuster. Many people in the 1970s and 1980s assumed that Bob Hope was one of Carson's favorite guests on The Tonight Show because of how often he appeared on the show. However, the reality is rather different. He was very unpopular with Carson. There was a solid rationale to the talk show host's distaste for Hope, even though he did respect him. To begin with, Hope's outward appearances are consistently consistent. It's like if it's a spiritual initiation for him. The comic would occasionally exit the stage unannounced as the credits rolled, serving as a surprise guest on the show. After that, he would engage Carson on a brief exchange with his prepared jokes before introducing a clip of pre-recorded highlights to hype up his upcoming. As quickly as Hope made an appearance on the show, he would also leave, as if he were constantly on the road. You can imagine how exhausted everyone is, especially the host, because this skit continued throughout all of his appearances. Carson and Hope had many commonalities, but they were never really friends or colleagues. Although Carson respected Hope's position in the entertainment industry, producer Peter LaSalle of The Tonight Show went on to remark that Carson was not a huge fan of Hope's work. With comedic styles that were a carbon copy of one another, these two men were NBC's biggest performers back then. Whereas Carson's comedy was more refined, Hope's comedy was more focused on current events, with gags about the news that avoided political viewpoints. The latter also had a gift for improvising, something he lacked, particularly when hosting Hope. The latter's routines were penned by his staff of writers, and Hope's glaring lack of improv abilities made his inability to generate spontaneous comedy all the more apparent. The two men were somewhat rivals, since Carson was aware that Hope was the only other star on NBC who might threaten Carson's influence. Hope, on the other hand, was riding high, having been NBC's primetime sensation since 1950. Carson was thus unable to disprove that. In addition, Hope was, according to Pop Cultural Illusions, the most popular radio star on NBC in the 1930s and 1940s. Carson despised the other man for several reasons, one of which was his ability to almost secure an appearance on The Tonight Show without even a prelude, which Hope could do with relative ease. He would do that frequently whenever he wanted to market something, and let me tell you, he had something to push pretty much all the time. Carson's irritated tone whenever Hope booked himself onto the show was something LaSalle recalled. Carson, however, would always respond, "No, you can't turn down Bob Hope," anytime the producer would inquire as to whether the talk show host wanted to decline. Since the comedian had helped launch NBC to fame, he knew that the network's executives held Bob Hope in high esteem. However, in an effort to keep their relationship amicable, NBC allowed him the flexibility to come on the show whenever he pleased. Carson thought it was annoying when Bob Hope showed in at the last minute. Additionally, even as the comedian's memory began to deteriorate in his latter years, the performance continued unabated. Hope provided Carson a list of questions he wanted asked in order to keep his charade going, with the explicit directive that they must be asked in the same sequence that they appeared on the list, allowing no opportunity for improvisation. Hope's biographer Richard Zoglin noted in the comedian's autobiography that Hope found it increasingly difficult to make guest appearances in his later years due to deteriorating hearing and vision. Johnny had to be very careful to follow the notes his staff had given him because he frequently struggled to understand Carson's inquiries. Hope might respond to a different question if he asked it out of sequence. Carson was naturally frustrated by this development as he enjoyed engaging his guests in real discussion and generating jokes on the fly as one of his many strengths. Carson would write a memoir about his time with Bob Hope in which he said that he hated the interview because it was so scripted and detailed, including a long list of the comedian's does and don'ts, and because the show's ratings would plummet any time Hope was on the show. Also refuses to listen to Tonight Show producer Jeff Sulzing, who happened to be Carson's nephew, and insists on using 5-minute highlight clips, despite Sulzing's advice to keep them to 2 minutes. In all candor, Johnny Carson has been involved in a number of high-profile feuds, including those with Rich Little, Joan Rivers, and Wayne Newton. When it comes to his least favorite guest, though, it would have to be Bob Hope. With Bob Hope being the talk show host's least favorite guest, it's reasonable to assume that Johnny Carson had other unforgettable ones that affected him and his viewers. Among the notable guests on The Tonight Show was Frank Sinatra, a fellow performer and singer. One thing to keep in mind is that Sinatra rarely gave interviews, and even when he did, very few people dared to question him. Rarely do you get to witness Sinatra roasting anyone, but when you do, it's generally on The Tonight Show couch with Don Rickles by his side. If anything, it helped Sinatra feel comfortable enough to let his own personality shine through, so it was all positive and no harm. Drew Barrymore was overjoyed when she was 7 years old and found herself seated on the couch of The Tonight Show. It had been her lifelong goal to meet the famous Carson after starring in Steven Spielberg's E.T. It had been her lifelong dream to meet him, she told the talk show presenter. In 1976, the renowned filmmaker and radio host also made an enlightening appearance on The Tonight Show. While appearing as a guest, Wells boldly stated his belief that radio was the pinnacle of entertainment media, as paying attention to the speaker would be required. He brought this up as an analogy for those who watch too much television and don't pay attention to what's being stated on screen. What Wells said is true, and there is proof of it even in our times. His ability to joke about and laugh alongside Carson on The Tonight Show makes it one of his most memorable TV appearances. The Tonight Show also had the pleasure of welcoming Robin Williams, an American actor and comedian. Even though he was still a young, developing genius, his apparent skill shone through and his boundless energy just added to it. Although he appeared on other variety shows, his appearance on Carson was the one that many people will always remember. Among the most famous American newscasters of all time, Walter Cronkite spoke with Johnny Carson in 1982 to fill Carson up on his life since his last show. Just like Wells' interview, Cronkite's visit was illuminating since he and Carson discussed the issues with TV news at the time and the objectivity of TV journalists. As he and Carson both laughed at the anguish of a new reporter's last day on the job, Cronkite was overjoyed to be a part of the show. In addition to Bob Hope, American comedian Joan Rivers made more than 90 appearances as a guest on The Tonight Show. If you believe Mix.net, then, because of how warmly the audience accepted her, Rivers quickly became one of the most popular guest hosts. Over time, she grew her own television network and ceased appearing on The Tonight Show. She allegedly informed Carson just before her show premiered that she was planning to launch her own show. The latter then decided she couldn't appear on his show again. Burt Reynolds was a major figure in the 1970s when he regularly made stellar performances on The Tonight Show. It was expected that the actor would be a frequent visitor on the show, given how popular he was whenever welcomed over. It was even said that Burt Reynolds made an appearance 61 times when Carson was host of the show. In 1984, Farrah Fawcett, who was starring in Charlie's Angels, visited The Tonight Show to promote her next film, The Burning Bed. Considering how drastically different her job was from her typical fan and viewer fare, it's little wonder a lot of people tuned in. This time around, she portrays a battered housewife who takes it upon herself to set her home on fire in order to protect her children and herself. The actress had a wonderful time chatting with Carson about her part preparation and the significance of the play for her. Now, the fact that Jack Gleason made his one and only appearance on The Tonight Show in 1985 as a guest makes it all the more noteworthy. It was more than enough to witness Gleason's masterful guest appearance on The Tonight Show. Jim Henson, widely regarded as the greatest renowned puppeteer of all time, made an appearance on The Tonight Show alongside Kermit the Frog. The interaction between Kermit and Carson was both amusing and hilarious, and it had the audience and spectators in fits of laughter all through the show. Including Don Rickles' name here would be remiss, of course. With an incredible record of over 100 appearances, he is likely the most popular guest on Johnny Carson's The Tonight Show. Everyone adored this insult comic, and it's safe to say that the comedian really shone on The Tonight Show. Naturally, Jay Leno, who would later host the show, was one of Carson's notable guests in 1989. Even though Fred Savage was the featured guest on that episode, Jay Leno stole the program with his fantastic comments, which led to a humorous back and forth with Carson. The present host, Carson, engaging with the show's future presenter Leno was enjoyable to see, even though Leno wouldn't take over as host for another 3 years. Additionally, it served as a wonderful reminder that Jay Leno possessed the comedic talent to achieve greatness and merit the opportunity to succeed Carson. Please hit the like button and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Then make sure you subscribe and hit the like button while keeping the notification bell on so you won't miss a single update. Keep shining until then.